the close. And this is the section when you actually ask for the order. And I will tell you something very, very ironic here is that when I train sales forces, what I find very often is that salesmen who are not doing well, they don't ask for the order very much at all. Sometimes not at all. How many times do you ask for the order? It's not once. It might be 3, 4, 5, or 6 times, done in a very elegant way and accompanied by a tone of reasonableness and sincerity, not of, give me one shot and you won't be sorry. It'll be like, give me one shot and believe me, you will not be sorry. Sound fair enough? That's more of a tonal pattern that you would find in a close. Let me just, this is in the straight line system itself, just so you understand for building a script at the end. Typically what you're doing is that when you're done creating your case and you're looping into your actual close, a typical language pattern for a close would be along the lines of, and give me one shot and believe me. If I'm even half right, the only problem you'll have is I didn't call you 6 months ago and get you started then. Sound fair enough? Now, there are actually 3 tonal patterns in that close. I'll tell you what they are. Number 1 is a tone of absolute certainty, which is just give me one shot and believe me. If I'm even half right, that's certainty. Then you transition from certainty into sincerity, which would be the only problem you'll have is I didn't call you 6 months ago. Not the only problem you'll have is I didn't call you. That's not sincerity. Sincerity is calm, it's low key, it's the only problem you'll have is I didn't call you 6 months ago and get you started then. Sound fair enough? So that's a language pattern. And that last, sound fair enough, that's your reasonable man statement. Not like, sound fair enough, or sound fair enough. It's, sound fair enough, you're reasonable, I'm reasonable, it's no big deal. That's how you close somebody. So it's not a close of certainty, of high pressure, it's just reasonable, sound fair enough, no big deal. Okay, that's a typical tonal pattern for closing. So let me now go through the actual language patterns themselves, just to give you an example for a language pattern for an opening and the body and the close. Just to give you an example here that you can take and use it along with your manual that you're getting here that will allow you to write your scripts very, very effectively and in not that much time. Because the goal is not just for you to write a great script, but also to save time, because time is money. So to give you some shortcuts into writing effective scripts. So let's start like this, okay? And in the opening, okay, one of the languages, I'm going to give you a couple here. I don't want to overwhelm you because you can get this all in the manual, but let me just give you one basic language pattern, okay? And this is when you introduce yourself, you say, how's it going today? And you have the enthusiastic and you sound good and you get people keyed into your voice, okay? The one pattern I want to talk about is what the reason for your call is, okay? Now listen to me very closely at the tone of my voice. I say, and they say, you say, how you going today? They say, great. You say, great. Well, the reason for the call today is we're reaching out to people in your area, whatever it is you're selling, right? We've been contacting homeowners in your area or contacting people on our list, right? So you say, well, the reason for the call today is we're reaching out to people in your area, right? That's a reason why. Now, remember, there's got to be a reason why you called the person. It can't be, I just called you out of the blue. It's the reason for the call. I didn't call you yesterday. I didn't call you tomorrow. I called you now, so there's a reason attached to it. That's called a justifier. Okay, I'm going to write that down. It's called a justifier. And essentially, when you use justifiers, it dramatically increases your response rate of someone actually agreeing with you or letting you get what you want. Justifiers are very, very powerful. So I would say, watch. Well, the reason for the call is we've been reaching out to people in your area. Or I can put now a tone to that and say, great, well, the reason for the call today. See the difference? I say, great, well, the reason for the call today, or great, well, the reason for the call today, and I slightly drop my tone a bit, okay? And now all of a sudden the reason takes on a much more, ooh, what is it? Is it a secret? How you create scarcity, you create urgency, okay? So your first language pattern is going to be your reason for the call, accompanied by a tone of scarcity. And when you go to the actual, into the workbook, you'll notice that section there where I talk about the reason why you're calling it your first justifier. Another example here of a language pattern now where it comes to qualifying, okay, is when you ask somebody, let's say you have to ask someone a question that relates to finances. So one of the things that you would do is you have certain patterns, and they're all, again, all in your workbook here. One of the things is, let's say you're trying to qualify someone for an investment, and you wanted to find out how much money they were liquid for. Okay, you wouldn't say, how much money are you liquid for right now? They'll say, well, that's a pretty intrusive question, so you're not going to get the response you want, versus taking that language pattern and saying, how much are you liquid for right now? Just the ballpark. And you get this sort of like, no big deal, just for informational purposes, not a big deal. That's called your not a big deal tone. There's just for informational purposes. So that language pattern there, which is asking someone, what do you have in the bank? I mean, are they qualified financially? You would never say, so how much do you have in the bank right now? You'd say, well, what are you liquid for right now? It's just a ballpark, no big deal. And then you'll probably get the response versus someone clamming up and you'll break rapport. Okay, now let's move on from, that's the intro, let's move on to the body. Okay, and the intro, again, let me just give you this is the language pattern, I mentioned it before, which is your transition from the intro to the main body, which is, well, let me say this, John, based on everything you just said to me, this is definitely a perfect fit for you. Now, real quick, okay, the name of the program is X. Okay, and that's how you start your transition, okay? And the language patterns that you use in the main body, just it's important. I won't give you specific patterns because they vary so much industry to industry, but the important thing is that a specific, in the main body, it should be no more than a short paragraph. And it should end with, make sense so far? You follow what I'm saying? Okay, if you go on and on, if a pattern in the main body is 3 or 4 paragraphs, you lose the people. So each bite-sized chunk of information must be benefit-oriented, right? Not feature-oriented, benefit-oriented. And it should end with, you following? Make sense so far? And he says, yeah. You say, okay, great. You don't just, if he says yes, you don't keep plowing on. You say, okay, great. And make sure that your tone, again, is one of absolute certainty. So if he says, yeah, it's good, you don't say, great, like Tony the Tiger, but you'd say, great. You're going a little bit above him. And again, what you're doing is you're leading him along into a place of absolute certainty. Okay, now let's move from the main body of the script into the close. And I said it before, so let me repeat it again now. And I would say, here's one pattern that's very powerful. Let me backtrack for a second, okay? One pattern is, now getting started is very simple. It's just a question of some basic information, you get the account set up, and then we handle everything else for you. Now that, depending on what industry you're in, is a very, very potent closing mechanism that essentially it's no big deal to get started. Remember, and this is a very important psychological trigger, is that people are always running this equation. Watch what it is. They have an equation of, is effort in to benefit out. How much effort do they have to put in? How much risk do they have to put in? And how many benefits are they going to get from their effort? What you're doing with your language pattern, and it must also be congruent with your tone. So in other words, if you say to someone, now getting started is very, very simple. They'll be like, what the hell is that? You say, now getting started, very simple. Just a question of some basic information to get the account set up, and we handle everything else for you. That's a very powerful pattern for making it sound so simple for them to get started. And by the way, as an actual entrepreneur or salesperson, make sure that the system you have in place is simple. Because you wouldn't want to say that if it was very complicated. But the idea is, this is part of your actual operations and your marketing, is to make sure that you make it very, very easy for your clients to say yes. It shouldn't be that they have to say yes and then jump through 45 hoops. Now, obviously some situations, if there's banking stuff involved and mortgages, yeah, there are some hoops that need to be jumped through. But make it clear that, listen, we make this very, very simple for you. We handle all the paperwork, we hold your hand every step of the way, and it'll just take a couple of minutes of your time, or whatever amount is realistic, okay? So that would be something in your close, okay? And those are just very basic examples of language patterns. And I want to give you just now 2 more patterns here that you can focus on. Again, these are in the straight line system itself, the overall system, but one of the most important things that you want to do is the first question you're going to ask them after they say, let me think about it. Let's say you gave a great presentation, they want to think about it. First question you're going to ask them is, does the idea actually make sense to them? Do you like the idea? That's the beginning of a language pattern where you would resell, essentially you resell the company, the product itself, you resell the product itself. So, if someone says, let me think about it, well, typically we know they're being held back by one of the 3 tenets. So the idea is to raise up their levels of certainty. So your first language pattern is going to be, well, let me ask you a question. Does the idea make sense to you? Do you like the idea? So if they say, well, it's, I don't have enough money right now, you don't say, well, how come? Well, how much do you have? You don't play into the objection yet. You deflect, and then you run a pattern of, well, I hear what you're saying, but let me ask you a question. Does the idea make sense to you? Do you like the idea? Now notice the tone there. That was what I call a money aside tone. What I'm saying is, well, let me ask you a question. Like, all things being equal, hypothetically, does the idea make sense to you? Do you like the idea? I would never actually say in the language pattern, money aside, because then you make the whole thing an academic exercise. But by using the tonality that disarms them, this money aside tone, I get that across them emotionally, and I still get them to say, to stay in the sale. So I'd say, well, let me ask you a question. Does the idea make sense to you? Do you like the idea? And typically they'll say, well, yeah, it sounds pretty good. And we know that's not good enough. We need them to be absolutely certain that the product is great. So I would say, exactly. Well, let me say this. The true beauty of the program, and then I would go in and actually start giving them more benefits. Remember, I said keep your powder dry? This is why. Because after you go through the first initial body of your script, typically they don't say yes right away. So you want to have even more powerful stuff to help them come to the right decision, which is to make the decision to buy your product. Okay? That's your next language pattern. And the last pattern I want to go through very quickly here is this sort of, I call it the rich man, poor man pattern. And what that really means is you say to someone like, what's the worst that can possibly happen? Let's say I'm wrong, okay, and my product is not everything that I say it is, okay? What's the worst that can possibly happen? And you would lay out for them, if it was a stock market, say, listen, the stock goes down 3 points and you lose $1,000. Is that going to make you a poor man? And they'll say no. And then you say on the upside, even if I'm right and it does go up 20 points, right, and you make 3,000 or 4,000, that's not going to make you a rich man either. And they'll say no. You say exactly. But what it will do is serve as a benchmark for future business. And what I can do for you besides this one transaction, this is for stocks, but it applies to anything. Whether they're buying, a coaching program, whether they're buying a car, it's, what's the worst that can possibly happen? Okay? Now, of course, in some industries, it really works very well when there are ways to mitigate loss through guarantees, or in financial products, if there are any stop losses, or if insurance policies where there is equity in a policy they can cash in. So you have all these patterns, these situations depending on the industry. But the thing to remember is that what you're doing is you're trying to say to a person who's running this same benefit, energy, effort in, benefit out, this same, in an overall structure here, it would be like this. They'll say worst that can happen versus the best. And if the worst thing that can happen here is basically nothing because there's a guarantee, and on the upside, the benefits go far beyond the product itself. It's about a long-term relationship, and you start future pacing, meaning you start saying what I could do for you besides this over the long term. We work on referrals. We're here to be an asset to you and your family for the long term. It has a much, much more profound impact.